Hello, I'm Isaac Hayes III, founder and CEO of Fanbase. And right now we're accepting investors in our $17 million round to revolutionize the future of social media. Today, for just $399, you can own 60 shares of stock in Fanbase at $665 a share. Go to startengine.com/fanbase and invest today. While the big platforms have grown too massive and disconnected from their users, Fanbase is building a platform where creators and users truly come first. We've already raised $8.6 million from everyday investors who believe in this vision, and now you can join them. This is your chance to invest in a social media tech company with over 1 million users that is disrupting media by allowing anyone to reach all of their following and monetize their content from day one. The market is changing, big platforms are failing to serve their users, and Fanbase is stepping up to fill the gap. Don't wait until it's too late. Invest now. Invest for yourself and your future. Go to startengine.com/fanbase and own the future of social media.
Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punch!
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America.
All the momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, this difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig? Today is Friday, April 18th, 2025, coming up on Roland Martin Unfiltered, streaming live on the Black Star Network. Folks, we haven't made it to the first 100 days, and the twice-impeached, criminally convicted felon-in-chief Donald the Con Trump has unleashed lawlessness all across the country. Janai Nelson, the President and Director-Counsel at the Legal Defense Fund, will explain that although Trump's tactics aren't new, they can be stopped. Federal judges are doing their part, ruling against Trump left and right. A lot of people feared the courts were not going to do their part. Oh, but they are. According to the nonprofit organization Vera Institute, it was targeted by Trump's DOJ and DOGE, setting a troubling precedent for targeting nonprofits that receive federal funding. Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen just returned from El Salvador, where he finally met the Maryland man who was wrongfully deported by Trump. Plus, I talked with Jeanne Theoharis about her new book, King of the North, Martin Luther King Jr.'s life of struggle outside of the South, The book focuses on King's experiences in places like Chicago, Los Angeles, Boston, and others that influence his campaign for racial justice. It's a lot to unpack, and it is time to bring the funk on Roland Martin Unfiltered on the Black Star Network. Let's go.
He's got it. Whatever the miss, he's on it. Whatever it is, he's got the scoop, the fact, the find. And when it breaks, he's right on time and it's rolling. Best believe he's knowing. Putting it down from sports to news to politics. With entertainment just for kicks, he's rolling. It's on go, roll, roll, y'all. It's Roland Martin, rolling with Roland now. He's funky, he's fresh, he's real, the best, you know he's Roland Martin now.
Folks, it's been 88 days since the twice-impeached, criminally convicted felon-in-chief Donald Trump occupied the White House. During these 88 days, he has abused in a massive way presidential power by dismissing individuals from federal boards, laying off thousands of employees under the pretext of saying the government needs the money to fund other operations, openly disregarding court orders and unlawfully deporting individuals, and also just completely saying they're not going to comply with court orders. It's been a fierce battle fighting against him, especially in the federal court system. Janai Nelson, the President and Director-Counsel of the Legal Defense Fund, wrote an op-ed in The Nation called "We Can Defeat Trump's Lawlessness. We've Done It Before." She joins me right now. Janai, glad to have you here. You lay out that it can be defeated. Let's unpack that, because just we saw today, even in the very, very conservative Fifth Circuit, that judges have been nailing Trump on how they are abusing power, just deporting folks for the hell of it.
That's right. What is happening is so egregious that you see some of our staunchest, most conservative, some of the most extreme circuits and judges recognizing that our Constitution, our democracy, the rule of law itself is at stake because it is being abused so plainly in plain sight with zero restraint. And if there's any fidelity to the rule of law, if there's any interest in keeping this country from devolving into a full-out autocracy, the courts have to step in and enforce the law and recognize that no one is above the law. Even if this president thinks that he has full immunity, he still cannot engage in unlawful conduct without a check by these courts. And certainly the people in his administration don't enjoy the same immunity that he does. So what they're doing at his behest and at his direction is putting them, their lives, their livelihoods, their licenses at risk. Because in many instances, they are engaging in civil rights violations, potentially human rights violations, and misconduct that can lead them into potential criminal conviction. So this is serious business, and I'm glad to see that the courts are stepping up and stepping in.
So here's what's interesting right now. You've got Democrats saying it is wrong for Democrats to be focused on people like the man who was deported to El Salvador, Senator Chris Van Hollen, traveled there to meet with this man. They're saying, oh, no, you should ignore those things. But the courts are hitting them left and right. Now, I know the LDF is a nonpartisan group, but to me that sounds idiotic. If you believe in the rule of law, if you believe in the Constitution, then as Congresswoman Barbara Jordan said in the Watergate hearings, my faith in the Constitution is whole and it is complete. And I will not stand idly by and watch people abuse this. To me, that's crazy advice.
Yeah, as you said, LDF is nonpartisan. We don't give political advice. What we do is say what the law requires. And the law requires that every single person has a right to due process, has a right to be treated equally under the law, should not be subject to human and civil rights abuses. And the problem that we are in right now as a country is this very self-centered approach to rights and to protections. And we have to realize that if we are serious about the principles that hold this country apart from many others, or at least used to, that it doesn't matter who is being targeted. What matters is whether the principle that we believe in is being abused, if it's being ignored, if it's being weaponized. And we should not care against whom that is happening. We should simply care that it is happening. I'd like to believe that all of us believe that every human is created equal and deserves those protections and rights. But even if you don't believe that, the fact that these principles are being weaponized should be of concern to all of us, that this government has turned itself against its people is one of the most concerning developments in the evolution of this democracy in modern history. We are in uncharted waters, and this idea that, you know, our democracy is unraveling or maybe under authoritarian or fascist threat is no longer a notion. It is a clear and present danger that is actively unfolding in front of us.
Well, I'm sitting here looking at, I follow Kyle Chaney of Politico on Twitter. This was just 2 hours ago. He said, just in, lawyers for Venezuelan nationals say they're being loaded onto buses this hour in anticipation of a new wave of Alien Enemies Act deportations. With less than 24 hours notice, they're asking Judge Boasberg for an immediate restraining order requiring 30 days notice. They don't believe in due process. They don't believe in people following the process. We ran a video the other day of people thought was someone with ICE who was breaking the window of a man, and we find out that he was actually with a militia group. I mean, he was not actually with ICE. I mean, what Trump is doing, he is giving these people permission to essentially kidnap folks.
That's right. We're seeing live kidnappings. We're seeing live abductions. We're seeing people being pulled off the street without any explanation, without anyone giving any ID. And if anyone is confronted with that circumstance, they don't know what to do. They don't know if this is lawful conduct of people who are licensed and deputized with the authority to confront them, or if these are rogue criminal actors. And in many instances, we're seeing, as you pointed out, a confluence of both at the same time. We are in dangerous times, and this is anyone. If you are perceived to be someone who might be an immigrant or, you know, might not have lawful papers or citizenship here, you could be a target. And we're seeing with each passing day that every citizen in this country is closer to being under threat. An actual citizen was mistakenly detained by ICE and had to be returned. We're seeing a refusal by the government in El Salvador to return Mr. Garcia, pardon me. It's unbelievable the level of incompetence and intentional harm and violence that's being inflicted by this government. And even when they recognize that they've done something wrong, they are not taking adequate steps to undo that harm and to retract their efforts and actions. So we are in very, very rogue territory, and we should be crying out in protest, and we should be calling on every elected official to do what Representative Van Hollen has been doing and what other representatives have been saying. Representative Garcia, with whom I was in conversation last night, and so many others have actually been speaking out, and we need to amplify those voices.
This right here is amazing. Have you ever, in your legal career, seen a judge write this? And this is a 3-judge panel, a Reagan appointee. And this is regarding Mr. Garcia, the man from Maryland. The judge writes, it is difficult in some cases to get to the very heart of the matter. But in this case, it is not hard at all. The government is asserting a right to stash away residents of this country in foreign prisons without the semblance of due process that is the foundation of our constitutional order. Further, it claims in essence that because it has rid itself of custody, that there's nothing that can be done. This should be shocking not only to judges, but to the intuitive sense of liberty that Americans far removed from courthouses still hold dear. The government asserts that Abrego Garcia is a terrorist and a member of MS-13. Perhaps, but perhaps not. Regardless, he is still entitled to due process. If the government is confident of its position, it should be assured that position will prevail in proceedings to terminate the withholding of removal order. I mean, these judges are literally themselves shocked at what they are witnessing, and to have DOJ officials, lawyers walk into their courtrooms and literally say, we're not going to follow your order. The Supreme Court ruled 9-0 against Trump. He is out here going, oh, no. They ruled in our favor.
Yeah, well, we know that this administration traffics in lies and falsehoods. You know that they will look directly into a camera and tell you that what is up is down, what is left is right, and what is wrong is also right. And we are much smarter than that. We have to be discerning. And as media professionals, as you do all the time, media has to call it out. They have to name a lie. And that's what we're seeing. It defies exactly what was written in these court statements and court orders. And many people have talked about us approaching a constitutional crisis. We are having that crisis right now. And this crisis will only worsen unless this administration sees that there are actual consequences. They're going to be held in contempt of court. They may face actual fines. And if they continue to defy these court orders, they may face even more severe sanctions. And this is necessary if they're going to ignore an entire third branch of government when the Constitution established this tripartite system so that we have checks and balances. We can't have one branch, the executive branch, cancel out all others. And that's what's happening right now. Everyone must rein this in, including Congress, because if this administration continues to go too far, which it already has in my view, we need to be talking about impeachment. This is clear. This is clear. This president and his administration are violating all sorts of laws, and these are grounds for impeachment.
I know y'all have been focused on this as well, and in order to win, you need folks who are willing to fight. And when you have major law firms capitulating, cutting deals with Donald Trump because he's issuing, frankly, illegal executive orders targeting law firms, that can happen. Universities are buckling as well. Thankfully, Harvard, MIT, and others are fighting back. But in order to combat lawlessness, you've got to have people who are not afraid to fight.
Not afraid to fight, not afraid to enforce the law, not afraid to honor their oath to the profession that they sought to enter, for which we took an exam and completed an oath to uphold our Constitution. So it is deeply disturbing as a lawyer, as a person who has fought for civil rights for decades, who represents an institution, the Legal Defense Fund, that has used the law and the power of law and research and people in nonviolent, peaceful ways to help evolve this country for over 85 years. It is one of the most concerning matters at this moment to see the legal profession buckle. However, there are more of us who have stood firm than have buckled, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. There was an amicus brief that the Legal Defense Fund filed in support of Perkins Coie and Wilmer Hale and Jenner and Block, 3 law firms that are actually litigating against the Trump administration because of their lawless executive orders. And we're proud to stand with those law firms and to remind the courts that not only is what is happening unlawful in this moment, but it harkens back to a time period where organizations like ours and civil rights lawyers in the South were harmed and threatened, and there were attempts to intimidate us from pursuing what we knew what was right under the law, from pursuing our efforts to end legal apartheid in this country. And we stood firm and we prevailed. And that's what these law firms and lawyers must do today. When you face lawlessness in the eye, it is your obligation to use the power of law to defeat that lawlessness, that effort to undermine everything that we stand for and why we came into this profession in the first place. Because if we don't hold the line, we will quickly descend into a space that is irretrievably harmful for our citizens and, frankly, for the entire future of this country, our national security, our national standing. Really, it is a slippery slope into a true spiral that I don't know we will ever recover from if we don't start to gain hold of it.
And it's always amazing, Janai, and I tell people this all the time. It's always amazing when people finally wake up and realize what's going on. New York Times columnist David Brooks, conservative columnist, dropped this, and it says, "What's happening is not normal. America needs an uprising that is not normal." And he goes on and he writes about how empires died. And then he said, Trumpism is threatening all of that. It is primarily about the acquisition of power, power for its own sake. It is a multi-front assault to make the earth a playground for ruthless men. So, of course, any institutions that might restrain power must be weakened or destroyed. Trumpism is about ego, appetite, and acquisitiveness, and is driven by a primal aversion to the higher elements of the human spirit, learning, compassion, scientific wonder, the pursuit of justice. When you see the capitulation of media, unwilling to do stories, when you see, let's cut deals with Trump so our mergers can go through, and who cares if he's suing us because 60 Minutes interviewed Vice President Kamala Harris, or ABC cutting their deal and the money going to his library. What this is about is, let me break any institution that could shine a light upon me. When I do this show, I'm literally sitting across from this portrait of Ida B. Wells Barnett. And it hangs in our studio. Ida B. Wells Barnett is Harry Belafonte, and is James Baldwin. And every time I see that Ida B. Wells Barnett photo, and let's get a shot of that, the quote that she has is right there when she talks about the way to seek truth is shine a light upon the darkness. And media, if there's a moment where media has to be willing to challenge power, this is it. If there's a moment where media has to inform the public of what's going on, this is it. When people hit me and go, you know what, man, y'all keep talking about Trump and MAGA, that's just enough. I'm like, no, it's not. If you don't understand that what is happening literally is about impacting the next 50 to 100 years, a total destruction of civil rights. That's what we are fighting. We are fighting literally for the next 2 to 3 generations.
I could not agree more, Roland. So, you said when people wake up, what will they see? And that's why there was this quote unquote war on woke, because they want people to remain asleep, to have their eyes closed to the criminality, to the corruption, to the destruction that we are seeing play out. Those of us who knew this was coming, those of us who saw the signs of it, those of us who have been screaming about the embers of white nationalism that are still burning in this country and now are a flame. We knew this was happening. That is why there are all of these efforts to ban books, to put limitations on protest, to stop people from being able to vote. There is an effort to take away all the levers of power, all the potential accountability of government, to take it and wrest it from the hands of the people and to put it in the hands of a very small, increasingly wealthy minority of people who do not have this country's interests at heart at all. It's only self-interest, self-aggrandizement, self-serving, self-dealing that is happening on the part of many in this administration. And so it is incumbent upon the media to lay those truths bare. This transcends party. This transcends politics. We're talking about basic fundamental rights. We're talking about whether the United States of America, as we have known it for the past 60 and nearly 250 years, whether it's going to continue to exist, whether we're going to continue to be in a free society. And we can continue to debate all sorts of policies. We can continue to have partisan politics and all sorts of things where we agree to disagree. But one thing we must stand united on is whether we want the United States of America to continue to exist, because that is the threat that we're facing. And so many people have been sounding this alarm, and I'm glad that more people are waking up to that piercing sound.
Yep.
And I hope it won't be too late before everyone recognizes the enormity of the threat that we face.
And this is one of the reasons why we have said on this show, this is not a moment to rest. This is not a moment to check out. This is not a moment for folks to say, hey, you know what, that's someone else's fight, because what is happening will impact every single one of us.
That's absolutely right. Everyone has to get engaged. Everyone has a role to play. I don't care what your position is, where you're located, what your identity is. You have a contribution to make in this effort to save our democracy, in this war against freedom, this war against truth, this war on education. Everybody has a role to play, and that can be any number of things, including how you spend your money, including how much you hold your elected officials and your representatives to account, including your ability just to educate your neighbors and friends and reach out and call people into this fight. It's imperative that each one of us find a role to play, because whether you think you're in this or not, you absolutely are. No one is exempt.
Indeed, indeed. Janai Nelson, we appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Roland.
Folks, going to a break. We'll be right back. Roland Martin Unfiltered right here on the Black Star Network.
Next on the Black Table with me, Greg Carr. The enormous impact of race, education, and affirmative action in America, and how, believe it or not, white America is starting to feel a little bit of the pain. Dr. Natasha Waraku joins us with a case study of one suburban community and how it reacted when the minority students started to excel.
And most people didn't say this explicitly, but was that, the academics standards are getting higher in part because of the Asian kids, and that is making our kids really stressed out. So we need to reduce the amount of homework teachers are allowed to assign.
She shares a perspective that you don't want to miss. That's on the next Black Table, only on the Black Star Network.
Hey, this is Motown recording artist Kim. You are watching Roland Martin Unfiltered. That boy, he always unfiltered, though. I ain't never known him to be filtered. Is there another way to experience Roland Martin than to be unfiltered? Of course he's unfiltered. Would you expect anything less? Watch what happens next.
Folks, my panel, Michael Imhotep, host African History Network show out of Detroit. Candace Kelly, legal analyst and host, Not All Hood, South Orange, New Jersey. Matt Manning, civil rights attorney, Corpus Christi, Texas. Candace, I want to start with you. You heard what Janai had to say right there, and this is a moment where the law matters. Above the Supreme Court says equal justice under law. And what we are literally seeing judges, conservative judges, Reagan-appointed judges, Trump-appointed judges say, the hell is going on? There is a thing called the Constitution, and you cannot ignore it just because you got elected.
Yeah. There's a thing called the Fifth Amendment. There's a thing called the 14th Amendment. There's a thing called due process which we have never ignored in our country in terms of not having someone respond to it. We might have ignored it, but not on this level. And I think what's really interesting is that normally you go through the court system, right? And you figure out if you need to ultimately go to the Supreme Court of the land, the United States Supreme Court, you get your answer and it trickles down, whether it's civil rights or whether it's segregation or gay marriage. The Supreme Court speaks and then everybody listens. Now, this is precedent. I mean, we've talked about some things that have been unprecedented that Trump has done, but we've seen them in some way, shape, or form from other people. This right here, before last week, if you're talking about a 9-0 decision, that in and of itself is almost an anomaly these days, especially when you have conservative justices that outweigh the liberal justices. Now we've got the decision, and what happens? Trump completely ignores it. This is why people should be paying attention now. It was really different last week. It used to be wait and see what the court said. Now the courts have spoken and nobody's listening. So what's really important is that if Trump is saying we need a separation of these powers, and this is our international rights that we have to deal with things on an international level, well, then Congress has to do their job and say, well, if we're separated as we are, then they have to do their job to make something happen otherwise. Otherwise, this isn't just precedent for people who are taken off the streets and go to El Salvador. This is a precedent for anything else that Trump wants to do when he says, the Supreme Court has spoken, but you know what? I'm just going to ignore it, just like I did in the case of Garcia. That's what this is about. It's not just about Garcia. It is such a big picture. Everybody, if you think it's not going to affect you, this is the time to be paying attention. History just happened. This is precedent that we have never, ever seen.
It is crazy to me, Matt, when you look at the decisions, when you look at just the flat out lying. One of the people who, he just, and again, to work for Trump means that you have to be a massive liar yourself. And that is the despicable white nationalist Stephen Miller. Listen to this.
One more question. Mr. Miller, I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned Bukele and the fact that Garcia is now in El Salvador's custody. But the question is, has President Trump expressed any interest at all in seeing Garcia move to a different country? Or would he want him to stay in El Salvador? Did he discuss that with Bukele or any of his advisors, specifically with immigration?
Well, the Supreme Court has been abundantly clear when it overturned the lower court's ruling that the foreign policy of the United States cannot be compelled by district court. The view of our administration has been very clear and consistent that this man is a subject and citizen of El Salvador, and El Salvador, as a sovereign country, has informed us repeatedly and publicly that it is their desire and intention to retain custody of him. And of course, we as a U.S. government cannot forcibly retrieve him against the wishes of El Salvador.
Matt, he's lying. It's not what the Supreme Court said. He's lying. Flat out lying.
That's also why we have extradition. We have an entire process whereby sovereigns recognize the sovereignty of another country, but also recognize their own sovereignty insofar as they're able to retrieve their citizens under certain circumstances. We know Miller is not being honest. And it's interesting because we focus so much on Mr. Trump because he is the one who is the president. But it's people like Stephen Miller who are really driving the ship with this insane policy. And it's terrifying that they are really trying to justify what they've already admitted was a mistake that does not have any basis in fact. And if you noticed, the moment that it came out that their lawyer admitted that they made a mistake and he was an administrative, error, paperwork error, however they framed it, they then tried to pivot and start saying, well, he's a member of MS-13 and
right.
terrorist. And exactly what you see them do to black people very often when we have any kind of criminal issue that's in the national zeitgeist, they immediately just start making ad hominems on Mr. Garcia as though, to Candace's earlier point, he's not afforded the due process rights that anyone in the United States of America is, even those who are naturalized citizens or those who have some authorization to be here and are not fully naturalized citizens. They're due process. You don't just get to spirit someone away and divest them of their opportunity to go in front of a judge and disprove what the government's allegations are. And that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing not only something unprecedented, but we're seeing something that is offensive to the fundamental ethos of this country, the idea that you at least get to stand in front of a judge and say, make the government prove it. What they're saying is not true. Instead, the government whisked this man away and then is now, thumbing its nose at the federal judge, telling him to kick rocks, which is not only unprecedented, but frankly, it upsets our entire system of the courts, because the courts, frankly, are like our currency. They're basically fiat courts, meaning they only have authority to the extent that we recognize they have authority. The moment the most powerful person in the world says, I don't recognize their authority, that authority is forever marred and really undermined. And that's what we're seeing. And the sad reality is all of the defendants and all of the litigants who go into a federal courthouse now still have to adhere to the judge, despite the fact, and the judge's orders, despite the fact that the president of the United States is telling the judges to kick rocks and openly calling for their impeachment and other kind of, negative actions toward them. So we're in an unprecedented space, and one that fundamentally shifts how the country exists.
Michael, you can see right here, this is the New York Times, and how this is on the White House Twitter feed, how they mock this up, and they strike out wrongly. They strike out Maryland man, put in MS-13 illegal alien, and then they go, who's never coming back? Even though the Supreme Court affirmed the decision that they have to facilitate the return of this man. The sheer arrogance of this is astounding. And again, what their goal is, if they can break the courts, then they have a wide open pathway to do whatever they want.
Yeah, Roland, this is what white nationalism unleashed looks like. And the lawlessness of it, after the Department of Justice admitted that he was wrongly taken out of the country in defiance of U.S. Supreme Court ruling, 9-0 ruling, including the 3 justices that Donald Trump nominated. This is what you're looking at. And you have some people who say, okay, we're in a constitutional crisis right now because you have Donald Trump and the Department of Justice defying a U.S. Supreme Court decision. But I would push back and say we entered into a constitutional crisis at 12 noon on January 20th. 2025, when a man who incited the insurrection in violation of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment was inaugurated as president. Even though the U.S. Supreme Court came up with a ruling that the 14th Amendment doesn't say, they said that state government does not have the authority to remove somebody from the ballot for a federal election. The U.S. Constitution doesn't say that. They just made some shit up. But but hashtag, we try to tell you, this is what we warn people about. So this is a severe fight right here. So we're going to have to continue to file lawsuits, continue to organize. What Senator Chris Van Hollen did was very courageous, I think. Okay. And this puts a lot of pressure on the Department of Justice, on Donald Trump, but also on El Salvador as well. So we have to continue to fight.
Fighting. The Vera Institute of Justice, an organization dedicated to ending mass incarceration and enhancing community safety, recently reported that they were contacted by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency. You know, that fake department? According to Vera, DOGE intended to assign a team to work with them and planned to do the same with every nonprofit receiving federal funding. However, Vera's legal team pushed back, questioning DOGE's legal authority to investigate them, especially since the Justice Department had recently discontinued its grants to Vera. As a result, DOGE withdrew its request. Insha Rahman, the Vice President of Advocacy and Partnerships at the Vera Institute, joins us right now. And Insha, this is utterly insane. This notion that Elon Musk can insert himself into nonprofits, federal agencies, USAID, into law firms. This idea that we have the authority to not only look at grants, but go inside of institutions and essentially try to take them over.
It is insane, and it is dangerous. It's such dangerous precedent. So, as you said, Roland, we were contacted by DOGE, and we believe that they thought they can come in and take over our organization because we have historically received federal funding to do the important mission-driven work we do to end mass incarceration, to fight for immigrant rights, and to build safe, thriving communities. Now, the Vera Institute of Justice is a 64-year-old national organization. Many of your viewers might not have heard of us, but we have been around doing this work with government partners and communities across the country in red states, blue states, and everywhere in between to actually make sure that our communities are safer and that we are investing in the services and programs that help people thrive. Now, none of that should be controversial. And yet, when we received a notice of termination of our federal funding 2 Fridays ago from the Department of Justice, they told us they were cutting our funding because your priorities and your work no longer fits within the agency's purview. Now, what we did immediately was write an open letter to Attorney General Bondi to call out the hypocrisy of cutting funding for services. And I'll tell you exactly the grants that we got, what they were supporting. They were supporting our work with prisons to make them safer and to make sure there's dignity for correctional staff and for people who are incarcerated, to make sure that law enforcement knows how to provide services for survivors of domestic violence and crime, and to make sure that in communities where people are in mental health crisis, we actually provide services and the right response. All of that should be non-controversial, and yet we were targeted for our federal funding to be cut. So the question is why? And it's because Vera works on immigration and crime, the 2 issues that are easily caricatured by the right. We have been in right-wing media circles, sort of a constant punchline of these defund the police and open border liberals funded by George Soros, even though we are none of those things. And so when we called out the Attorney General and asked for her to reconsider her decision, we knew we might be opening ourselves up for attack. We did not expect DOGE to come knocking, and yet they did. And so it's just wild to us that this is how this administration is operating, and it's wild to us that a Department of Government Efficiency that was literally set up to say, let's look at government agencies, is coming knocking on the door of an independent nonprofit organization.
Well, what's weird is if you look at what your organization does, I thought that supposedly dovetails with the First Step Act. Donald Trump is always taking credit for that. So you would think that if they were real about that, he named Alice Johnson, Pardon Czar, Topeka Sam is working with them. But I guess they really don't like groups that focus on mass incarceration.
Yeah, they don't like groups that are willing to call out this administration and call balls and strikes. And we have since January 20th been public in our opposition to this administration's mass deportation agenda and gutting federal funding under Health and Human Services and other agencies for basic treatment, counseling, access to programs in communities that actually prevent crime and break its cycle. So they don't like people who are willing to call out their political agenda for what it is. And mind you, the work that we do is all evidence-driven. We are an organization that bases everything we do, the policies that we advocate for, based on research. But this is an administration that is not looking at evidence, it's looking solely at politics. And now, when the Department of Justice funding was cut, we thought that might be the end of it. But when DOGE came knocking, we did ask, why do you think you have authority to investigate us, to ask to assign a team to us, which we knew was a euphemism for taking us over? And they said, well, we're actually planning to assign a DOGE team to every agency and institute that receives congressional monies. And so that should be alarming. By our count, there are about 100,000 nonprofit organizations across the country that receive some amount of federal funding. And if DOGE plans to go take all of those over, that is a terrible and scary precedent for our communities and for what happens for the services of, and the good work that nonprofits do. Now, the other part that DOGE said to us was, when we asked, well, what does working with an organization look like? They actually referenced the U.S. Institute of Peace. And if folks are following that story, we know that by working with them, literally what DOGE did was go and take over their building, take over the entire organization, fire all of their staff.
Yeah, fire everyone.
Exactly. And then literally install a DOGE staffer, a 27-year-old, to be the new executive director of the U.S. Institute of Peace. So that's what nonprofits across the country can expect if DOGE comes knocking on your door.
Yeah, and we know that is utterly insane. So it is just crazy to see what we are experiencing, and they want to tear down nonprofits. They want to tear down NGOs. They want to go after everyone. They literally want to completely eradicate. I keep saying for African Americans, they want to completely destroy the economic and the civil rights infrastructure. They want to completely incapacitate these groups and spend the next 4 years making their lives extremely difficult in order to drive their agenda. Pure and simple.
It is. It's as simple as that. It really is. And we have been really public about this. We had the Washington Post break a story the night that we spoke to DOGE earlier this week, because we think sunlight is a really important disinfectant. Because I agree with you, Roland. All this administration wants to do is advance their agenda, and they don't care about who they harm, the very real impact that it will have on families and communities. And so we need to call this out, because by calling it out, hopefully we can stop it here, as opposed to encroaching on other organizations. Maybe other organizations aren't able to call it out and push back in the way that we are. We decided, yes, losing $5 million of federal funding is a big hit, but it would be a much bigger hit if they come after other organizations where their entire funding is federal funding and they're doing important work, and maybe they can't push back in the way that we can. So we're hoping sunlight is the biggest disinfectant, and that being loud and asking for solidarity will help to stop this in its tracks.
You also can't cut deals with these thugs because they're going to keep going.
That's right. We have seen that. And, one thing I say to the point of dismantling nonprofit organizations, this is an administration that has systematically kneecapped the media, law firms, academic institutions. They're coming for the foundations of civil society, which are these NGOs. They're coming for us next.
Indeed. And we certainly appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Keep up the fight.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Folks, we come back. Democratic Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen returns from El Salvador. We'll show you what he had to say, and also how the president of El Salvador tried to set them up by saying that, they were just enjoying margaritas by the pool. Folks, if you want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered, the Black Star Network, support us by joining our Bring the Funk fan club. Our goal is very simple: to get 50,000 of our fans contributing on average $50 each a year. $4.19 a month, 13 cents a day. You support this show. You support the 4 other shows that we're working on. We're launching a business show. We're looking at a health show. Lots of things that are going on. And so your support is critical. If you want to give via Cash App, use the Stripe QR code. Here's the QR code right here. And if you're listening, go to blackstarnetwork.com for that. Also, you want to send a check or money order, please make it out to Roland Martin Unfiltered, please. Roland Martin Unfiltered, P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. PayPal's R Martin Unfiltered, Venmo's RM Unfiltered, Zelle, Roland at RolandSMartin.com, Roland at RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. We'll be right back.
This week on The Other Side of Change.
Black Maternal Health Week. The racial disparities are undeniable, making it clear that Black people experience racism from the womb. America and America's healthcare system has not taken the time to invest in what quality healthcare looks like for Black birthing people.
The state of Black maternal health in the United States is still dismal. It is environmental racism. It is systemic racism. It is the systems that we are born into.
Only on the other side of change on the Black Star Network.
I'm Russell L. Honoré, Lieutenant General, United States Army, retired, and you're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Democratic Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen says he has met with Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia, the man mistakenly deported there to a high-security prison for terrorists, back to the U.S. Van Hollen posted this on the social media. He talked about what his main goal is. He also, when he landed in the United States, he also spoke about what took place in debunking a lot of the lies that have actually been spread as well. This is the tweet. You see it right there, what he had to say. This is him speaking about so-called Margarita Gate, talking about what was being brought up and how, frankly, they were being set up by the El Salvador president. So check this out. Let me play this for you. Here we go.
Now I just want to take a moment. I hadn't planned to do this, but as I was landing on the airplane, I got a transcript of some questions President Trump was asked at the White House today about what I would call Margarita Gate. I don't know if you guys have been following this, but President Bukele, after I met with Kilmar, did this tweet showing us at a table with these 2 glasses. So here's what happened. When I first sat down with Kilmar, we just had glasses of water on the table. I think maybe some coffee. And as we were talking, one of the government people came over and deposited 2 other glasses on the table with ice, and I don't know if it was salt or sugar around the top, but they look like margaritas. And if you look at the one they put in front of Kilmar, it actually had a little less liquid than the one in front of me, to try to make it look, I assume, like he drank out of it. Let me just be very clear. Neither of us touched the drinks that were in front of us. And if you want to play a little Sherlock Holmes, I'll tell you how you can know that. So if you look at the video or the picture I sent out from the beginning of our meeting, you'll see there are no glasses on the table. So you'll see in later videos they are on the table. But they made a little mistake. First, some people are very careful, right? If you sip out of one of those glasses, some of whatever it was, salt or sugar, would disappear. You would see a gap. There's no gap. Nobody drank any margaritas or sugar water or whatever it is. But this is a lesson into the lengths that President Bukele will do to deceive people about what's going on. And it's also shows the lengths that the Trump administration and the president will go to, because when he was asked about a reporter about this, he just went along for the ride.
Bottom line is, we have a thug sitting in the Oval Office, and these people have no respect at all for the law. One of the things that we are seeing play out here, Matt, is, as we said earlier, they want to position this as, oh, here are Democrats defending an MS-13 gang member, wife beater, how dare you, because they want to ignore that the law matters. And if there's somebody black, because we already know this, the case, who's going, I don't care. We know about black people who are American citizens who have not gotten due process. Due process means prosecutors don't withhold evidence. Due process means you don't strike people from juries because they're black. Due process means you don't fake evidence. And in every example I just used, we've had numerous black people who've been the victims of a failure of due process in this country.
That's spot on. But what's really interesting, something you alluded to, is what we have not had, at least historically, is we have not had the highest law enforcement agency in the country being patently dishonest in front of federal judges in the way they are now. And you're talking about due process. What people may know is in the federal and in the state system, there's a law called Brady, or there's a former case called Brady. And basically that requires that a prosecutor has to give any evidence that may be exculpatory or mitigating to a criminal defendant, right? And most states have a corollary law. The reason that's important is now I think DOJ is going to have to give Brady on itself, because you have DOJ prosecutors standing in front of a judge either lying or obfuscating or otherwise, withholding evidence. And that's something that you hear people accusing, prosecutors of often in criminal cases. But it's now something that we have demonstrative evidence on that DOJ lawyers are doing and are being fired for the instances where they're being honest. So due process for Black people, for non-white people, has long been an issue in this country, but we have never, in my understanding historically, ever had circumstances where DOJ is patently being dishonest. It's interesting. I wasn't born in 1978. I wasn't alive. But when I saw that Van Hollen was going down to El Salvador, I frankly thought about Congressman Leo Ryan.
Yep.
Because Bukele, one of the things that I think has been lost in the media narrative about everything going on with Kilmar Garcia and all the people being deported is the fact that Bukele is an authoritarian. He's an autocrat as much as an autocrat exists. He thrives on the opportunity to be autocratic on the national and on the global scale. So him and Trump are two peas in a pod in this respect. And it's doubly problematic that it's El Salvador in particular, because he revels in the opportunity to be an authoritarian, right? And to have this mega prison and to enjoy. I mean, think about the tweet that he sent out when the plane was in the air and he just said, oops. I mean, how ominous is it that, he's sending a tweet that way? So I'm glad that there's proof of life of Mr. Garcia, but I am not in any way surprised that they're being dishonest about the truth of what happened with the whole Margarita Gate, and that we're seeing on the larger scale, Bukele engaging in exactly the kind of dishonesty and autocratic policy that Trump is.
When you are dealing with thugs, you have to respond accordingly, Candace. And this is not a situation where, well, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. No, you cannot. These are thugs. These are people who do not care about the law. What they care about is whatever they consider the law to be.
And I think what's most interesting is that we have known this. It's just now that we're seeing it so much more blatantly. I think it kind of pacifies people to have that expectation, which leads people to kind of lean back a little more. Remember when years ago, when Trump would do something, it would be ridiculous and out of this world. You couldn't believe it. He couldn't even have won the presidency. And now people are kind of like, very even keel about responses, because he's trained everybody to be that way. He's trained everybody to read media in a way that is just like they edited when you pulled up that New York Times article, or train people to have a serious press conference about somebody's freedom internationally who didn't have any due process, but we're talking about margaritas. That is the part of their plan. So we really have to be really critically discerning about what we are looking at in the media, or else we're all just going to be confused and kind of trumping out each other with mis and disinformation. But that's exactly where they want us to be. So this is really a good time to think about people like you, other outlets that are giving information that is real, and as ourselves being good consumers, so that when we look at stories like this, we can actually see the lies and not just say, oh yeah, that's expected. I think that's one of the travesties of this whole thing, this long press conference and how much he spent talking about Margaritaville.
What we have to recognize, Michael, that there is a clear impact here. And I want people watching and listening to recognize that this is not inside baseball. This is not all minutes that doesn't impact me. When you heard Incha talk about at the Vera Institute, how that nonprofit is being impacted. Services, real services are going to be neglected. People are not going to be able to truly access a variety of things in this government. The massive cuts that they have made, we are already seeing what the impact is going to be. And so we must be vigilant about this. And again, Black institution must be constantly on guard because, listen, we're on the chopping block. If it's Black, they're going to slap everything under DEI.
Absolutely, and they're doing that, everything from removing Harriet Tubman from the National Park Service website and talking about the Underground Railroad. Yes, they restored it, but we keep seeing these stories of African-American history, the Black erasure of African-American history from government websites, and then certain information is partly restored or what have you. We see the attack, we see the closing down of the Minority Business Development Agency, because of an executive order from Donald Trump. And we know that has helped African-American owned businesses get federal contracts. We see the lawsuit. There was a lawsuit in February that the National Urban League entered into against the Trump administration because of the attacks on DEI. We just see the NAACP has launched a lawsuit as well against the Department of Education and their attacks on DEI. So we see these attacks all across the board. And then also, as you've been talking about here, the shedding of tens of thousands of government jobs. If we just look at the U.S. Postal Service. U.S. Postal Service employs about 640,000 people. 29% of them are African American. Okay, so when we look at these attacks on the federal government, however, when we look at these attacks on federal jobs, when we look at these attacks on various programs, whatever excuse they use to attack, especially African Americans, they're doing it. Whether they say they're fighting anti-Semitism, whether they say they're fighting against diversity, equity, and inclusion, whether they say, oh, there's too many people employed in this government agency. We see these constant attacks. So we have to educate ourselves on what's happening and fight back as well.
Oh, absolutely. Folks, quick break. We come back. What happens if a racist acts a fool? You videotape it. Then the bigot turns around and sues you? Yeah, it actually happened. We'll tell you about that next right here on the Black Star Network.
This week on A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie here on Black Star Network, we are talking about all things, you got it, stress related. Yes, the big S, whether it's spiritual, physical, emotional, or sometimes it could be just in your head. Stress has a way of manifesting itself in our lives in such a way that it disrupts who we are and who we're in the process of becoming.
Stress is just as bad as a lot of the physical ailments that we think of.
That's all next on A Balanced Life on the Black Star Network.
This is Tamala Mann.
And this is David Mann. And you're watching Roland Martin
Unfiltered.
Months after a video surfaced showing Jonathan Spanos, the owner of a restaurant in Pennsylvania, going on a racist tirade during what looked like a road rage incident, repeatedly using the N-word and saying, "I'm a rapist." Okay, well, just watch for yourself.
Church again, and you're fucking half brother nigger. Really? Yeah, you're half nigger brother. Yeah, you're half nigger brother. Fuck you. Half nigger brother. Fuck you. I don't have a half nigger brother. Keep videoing. It's okay.
Okay, you said the N-word, like, on camera. That's going to be great for you. Oh, that's right. That's going to be great for you.
I am a racist. I hate trash.
John Spanos
is a
racist. Oh.
You pop me the finger, you're wrong. Shame on you.
Shame on you. Shame on you.
Shame on you. That's what I did. I said he has a half nigger brother.
That's going to be great for you.
I am a racist. I hate trash.
John Spanos is a racist.
Oh.
So Spanos is now suing the people who filmed him and posted the video online after the backlash he got. He claims he and his wife never threatened anyone and were just talking to a family friend outside their home when all this happened. He said the videos released has caused him and his family such emotional distress, led to the restaurant's closure. The restaurant's website is down. The place is marked as temporarily closed. This lawsuit asks for damages and says the video hurt his business and reputation. Here's him talking at a news conference.
Video captured a heated family confrontation in which I intentionally used the most ugly language known to me to lash out in anger. I repeatedly used the N-word to inflict pain on another person and sarcastically stated that I was a racist. I was wrong from not walking away from that volatile situation. I was wrong for responding in anger with hateful language. I was wrong for using a racist term.
I was wrong. I was wrong. I was wrong. Candace, does he have a legal claim?
Listen, the number one defense to defamation, which is what he's suing for, and intentional emotional distress, I believe, the number one defense is the truth. So we have the video, and that's the truth. Even if he was saying it sarcastically, the truth is that he said it. The truth is, right, that's the truth. He was on public property. Nobody invaded his privacy in order to get that video. Nobody did anything that was against the law. They shot a video that he participated in. He didn't even at the moment say, I don't want it. He was mad about it, but he decided to be sarcastic about it in his own words. But the First Amendment is out there for a reason. You are allowed to say things like that. The problem is that there are repercussions, there are consequences, that there are hate laws that are in place, and you cannot do that. So for him to sue for defamation is just really a waste of court filings, proceedings, times, and he should be penalized for that because that is ridiculous. If it's the truth, it can't be defamation, sir. That's it. That's it.
Matt?
You know, I hate having to answer questions after Candace. She's one of my favorite people, but she steals everything. She's 100% right. The only thing I'll add to that is I immediately thought of what a lot of states have, including Texas, what's called anti-SLAPP laws. So that's when you get a lawsuit against you for constitutionally protected activity, you have a strong defense. And most of the time, to Candace's point, those cases are dismissed. Now, that's a little different than defamation. But ultimately here, what I think you have is exactly what she said. He's on public property. He's the person is filming, exercising their constitutional rights. And then the dissemination of that, there's nothing illegal about that. So I frankly do not understand his lawyer's strategy at all. This seems to me like this is filed to try to save face by saying, you know, we're going to try to assert some nebulous legal right. But I don't see a jury of 12 people or 6 people, however it's constituted there, thinking that he has a legal claim at all, because not only is it the truth, I mean, he can't claim that he was in any way, you know, goaded or coerced or something into, one, making the statements, and 2, he doesn't have any expectation of privacy in anything that's happening on a public street. I mean, you use this language and you say these kinds of things at your own peril. So his business being shut down and all of that is his own fault. And I don't see how a jury would ever think there was a basis to this legal claim. Thank you for stealing everything, Ken.
What's also hilarious, Michael, is, this has brought me undue attention. I guess you want to continue it.
Yeah, exactly. So they're always remorseful after they get caught. You know, they always apologize and, God knows my heart and, I'm not that bad of a racist and things like this after they get caught, after it goes viral. So, and the other thing is he said the N-word multiple times. So it sounds like you've had practice with this as well. So, and then the patrons start withdrawing economic support from him, which they should, because you wouldn't want somebody like that fixing your food out of your site, would you? And now all of this comes back on him, and he's like, "Oh my God, no, come back, stop it." So this is now what the legal strategy may be trying to appeal to the Fox News Trump supporter crowd. Trying to get sympathy, trying to get support. Oh, come on and eat at my restaurant. Things of this nature. So they may be trying to, appeal to that. So in 2025, we need to be selective of where we spend our dollars eating also.
Yep. Hey, Spanos, I got one for you. Why don't you simply open up a restaurant called Bigots Are Us?
Hey, Roland, can I just say
Bigots
that
and briskets.
Michael had the ultimate black perspective on this. You wouldn't want that man fixing your food. That's exactly what my big man said. Right, Michael. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Roland, I will say this, that is one thing that could only be maybe a possibly good thing out of this is just like Michael said, that you get somebody to support him. He goes on Fox, makes his rounds. You get some nationalists, some right-winger to start a GoFundMe page in order to help this family that all he was doing was expressing his anger, and he has a First Amendment right to do this. And he will get lots of people, I bet, if there was a GoFundMe page. But that is the only reason why I could see that they are doing that. I agree with Michael.
All right, then. So, cool. First of all, Black and Missy. Okay, what we got? Come to me, please. All right, y'all. Something wrong with our video there. Justice Rich has been missing from Durham, North Carolina since March 26th. The 11-year-old is 5 feet 3 inches tall with black hair and brown eyes. Any more information about Justice Rich should call the Durham, North Carolina Police Department at 919-560-4600, 919-560-4600. Last story I got to ask y'all about, and that is this here. Donald Trump has named another head of the IRS. There was a power struggle with Elon Musk. Elon put his guy in, Scott Bassett. The Treasury Secretary is like, no, I'm over this. So the guy gets kicked out. But here's what's crazy. Trump's pick, Billy Long, had $130,000 of his debts just paid off by individuals who do business with the IRS. Michael, I'll start with you. This is one where Democrats, you do not allow that confirmation hearing to even be held.
Yeah, you do. So the confirmation hearing is in the Senate. For those that don't know. So you use every Senate tool that you have, procedural tool, to stop the hearing, but also draw attention to it. Wait a second, where does money come from? What type of underhanded tactics are being used? How is he going to have to pay somebody back the $130,000? $130,000. Isn't that how much Michael Cohen took out on a line of credit to pay off Stormy Daniels to keep quiet before the 2016 election? $130,000. Interesting number. So you bring up this, and weaponize that, utilize social media, get that out to people. But yeah, you stop the nomination.
What's crazy here, Candace, is this is the NewJersey.com story. Billy Long, a former GOP lawmaker and Trump's nominee for IRS commissioner, said he paid himself back using campaign donations for a $130,000 loan he made to his failed 2022 Senate campaign. The lever was the first to report on the filings. A note that since Long lost his bid for the Senate, the campaign committee raised less than $36,000. However, the campaign committee suddenly took in nearly $137,000 since Trump announced Long as his IRS pick. Wow, it's just amazing how this money just mysteriously shows up. Now we're good.
Right. Listen, I have hope in this process, but I also know what we've seen. Will he be wasting taxpayers' money in terms of going through the process, going through some type of confirmation hearing? He will. But we also know that we've talked to people about their alcoholism and their cheating and all different types of things on the Senate floor during this cycle that we thought would not pass muster and certainly did. So I think the verdict is out on this. Yeah, we know it's a waste, but Lord knows what the outcome will be, because these issues just can't predict anything. We just have such a bad precedent across the board in all branches of the government. You just don't know. I mean, this one is really hard to call, but he's going to sit in front of them. I don't think that that's going to stop, and everything possibly could work out in his favor. That's the 2025 we're living in.
I don't think it's hard, Matt, because it's very simple. If the Democrats don't show up for a committee hearing, you can't hold a committee hearing. And my whole deal is, you say, we ain't showing up.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, I think Michael's right, and I think you're right. Use every possible tool to prevent this. But here's the problem. The problem is you don't have a DOJ that's going to prosecute the inevitable hookups that he's going to do as the IRS commissioner if he's confirmed.
Oh, so yeah. I mean, this is not a real DOJ. Let's be real clear. This is truly a department of junk.
The normal fail-safe would be, a fear that if you're just openly being bribed, that you're going to end up like Menendez, right? But that's not going to happen because you have a DOJ that is not going to prosecute. So, I mean, if you're a criminal, what's the reason for not hooking this man up and filling his coffers up? So when he's the IRS commissioner, you get that payback favor. We know that's what's going to happen. So the Democrats should try to stop the confirmation. But once he's confirmed, what you're going to see is the same kind of graft we're seeing across the rest of the agencies.
Thugs. And keep in mind, one of the things Donald Trump did, he got rid of the law, if you will, that the companies could not bribe foreign officials. He's like, nah, we're good. Y'all can go back to that. I'm telling you, if this was an actual prosecution case, they would try the Trump administration on RICO charges. This is a criminal enterprise. That's what they are, a criminal enterprise. I bet R. Kelly is sitting in prison going, damn, I wish I had given some money because I would get pardoned by these people.
Jesse James on steroids. That's what this is.
They are. They are a criminal enterprise. They are an absolute, they're not just grifters, they are thugs. That's what they are, pure and simple. All right, Matt, Candace, Michael, appreciate it. Candace, good to see you. It's been a while since you've been on the show.
Yes,
glad to have you back. Folks, thank you so very much. I appreciate it. Folks, we're going to go to a break. We come back. We're going to hear from an author, Jeanne Theoharis. It's an amazing book. Every time we talk about Dr. King, it's always the South. It's always Birmingham. It's Selma. It's Georgia. It's Atlanta. It's what happened in the South. But the reality is, Dr. King from the beginning was also focused about the racism that was happening in the North. She details this in a fascinating book. It's a conversation you are going to enjoy. Don't forget, support the work that we do. Join our Bring the Funk fan club, folks. If you want to join the fan club, giving Cash App, here's the QR code right here. Click the Cash App button to contribute and to continue. If you're listening, go to blackstarnetwork.com for that QR code. And, of course, if you want to send a check and money order, make it out to Roland Martin Unfiltered. Again, not Uncle Roro, not Roro, not Roland Martin, not Unfiltered, not Black Star Network, not RMU. Make it out to Roland Martin Unfiltered, P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C., 20037-0196. PayPal, R. Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle, Roland at RolandSMartin.com, Roland at RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Download the Black Star Network app, Apple phone, Android phone, Apple TV, Android TV, Roku, Amazon Fire TV, Xbox One, Samsung Smart TV. Be sure to get a copy of my book, White Fear, The Brownie of America, Making White Folks Lose Their Minds, available at bookstores nationwide. Also, be sure to get our Roland Martin Unfiltered swag. Go to rolandmartin.creator-spring.com for our merchandise or the QR code right there. Also, don't forget, download the app Fanbase. If you want to invest, go to startengine.com/fanbase. When we come back, my interview, my Roland's Book Club interview with Jeanne Theoharis on King of the North. You're watching the Black Star Network.
This week on the other side of change.
Black Maternal Health Week.
The racial disparities are undeniable, making it clear that Black people experience racism from the womb. America and America's healthcare system has not taken the time to invest in what quality healthcare looks like for Black birthing people.
The state of Black maternal health in the United States is still dismal. It is environmental racism. It is systemic racism. It is the systems that we are born into.
Only on the other side of change on the Black Star Network.
Now that Roland Martin is willing to give me the blueprint, hey, Cyrus, I need to go to Tyler Perry and get another blueprint because I need some green money. The only way I can do what I'm doing, I need to make some money. So you'll see me working with Roland. Matter of fact, it's the Roland Martin and Cheryl Underwood show. Well, should it be the Cheryl Underwood show and the Roland Martin show? Well, whatever show it's going to be, it's going to be good.
All right. Before I got to talk about the book, I got to ask, Jeanne, are you kin to Liz Theoharis?
Yeah, you know that. She's my younger sister. We've talked about this. Absolutely.
No, God, Liz, Jeanne, you got to go with the bit. You got to go with the
Okay,
bit.
I'll go with the bit. I am.
For
Liz,
people who
sister.
don't know, of course, Reverend Liz Theoharis, repairs of the breach, partner in crime with Bishop William Barber.
Exactly.
Go ahead. There you go. So
Force of nature herself, right? Yep.
Absolutely.
Reverend Liz, as lots of people call her, Reverend Liz.
Well, let's get into this here. It's called King of the North, Martin Luther King Jr.'s life of struggle outside the South. A lot of people really don't understand 1966. They don't understand really the depths of the hate that Dr. King experienced. And he said when he was there in the Chicago suburb of Cicero that he never experienced that level of hate anywhere in the South. Why did you want to explore this aspect of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s life?
Well, I mean, I think to begin with, I think many of us are used to, if we think about Dr. King outside the South at all, right, it is in those last 2 years. And when you actually look more closely, both at his life and his work, the Southernization of Dr. King is really kind of limited and inaccurate. Dr. King comes of age in the North at both Crozier Seminary and Boston University. He experiences both segregation and the limits of Northern liberalism as a young person in graduate school. So there is never a time in Dr. King's work, beginning in Montgomery, where he's not calling out the racism and systematic segregation of the North. And when I use the word North, I'm using it in the sense that Dr. King uses it, which is Dr. King and many activists at the time used the word North to talk about everything from the Northeast to the Midwest to the West Coast that in many ways defined themselves as not being the South in terms of race relations. They were not the South. They were open. They were free. They were the promised land. Is the way.
And they would say that. They would say, oh, no, we're not them. No,
exactly.
no, we are not them. We're not like them.
Absolutely. And so one of the things to understand, and I think we have not understood, is that from the very beginning of his leadership, he is calling on Northerners, on Northern liberals, both to be outraged about what's happening in the South, but equally to be outraged about what's happening in their very own cities. And that as we start to see some Northern outrage about what's happening in the South, he is saying, okay, but you need to be equally outraged when someone can't get a job at where you work or can't buy a house where you live. So I think one of the things that I think we need to see is that Dr. King from the very beginning understood that segregation was not a regional sickness, but a national cancer. And he also understood that even some of the people, some of the white Northerners who began to get more concerned about what was happening in the South, and we can think about earlier in American history patterns like this, but who assiduously refused to confront segregation where they lived. And so the story of King of the North, right, starts much before, right, those moments in 1966 in Chicago that you're referring to. And it is a story of, again, Dr. King calling on people who considered themselves allies of the civil rights movement to walk the walk where they lived, really challenging this Northern gaslighting that said, oh, the problem is in the South. We might have some racism here, but it's not systematic like the South. He's really calling that out, saying it is systematic. So it's a very different view of Dr. King and about what the expanse both of his work was, but also the expanse of the Black freedom struggle.
I like how you start with the preface, where you lay out this speech and who he's talking about and the issues he's talking about, and you wait 4 paragraphs before you reveal the city that he is speaking about. And because what people even today, when they talk about these things, they talk about the freedom. They talk about how things were so different in the West, how they were different, how there were greater opportunities also when blacks left the South and moved up north. And those things are true. You didn't have segregated water fountains. You didn't have segregated buses, things along those lines, but you still dealt with the reality of Jim Crow. And what really was very interesting when you talk about this statewide referendum that dealt with the issue of allowing citizens to sell or rent their property to, as you said, whomever they wished. This point that you're making here, that's what got Ronald Reagan elected.
Absolutely.
This is, and so then when you start thinking about the attacks on the Black Panthers as well, carrying the rifles in Sacramento, so there's all these people, they love talking about liberal California and
yes.
liberal, and it's like, no.
Right.
California,
exactly.
White was white, so they operated. They might have been nicer, as you say, only the language was polite, and people keep getting confused by that. And even King, when he went to L.A. with the riots 5 years later, was even shocked with the level of poverty and racism there, because he thought it also was a lot different.
Well, I would be careful there, right? I mean, I think part of what we see when we see Dr. King over and over in LA in the years before the Watts uprising, right, talking about and joining a movement around police brutality in the city, calling for Chief William Parker, the head of the LAPD, to be replaced, marching around school segregation in LA, marching and sort of campaigning against Proposition 14 in 1964, which is trying to retain the right of Californians to discriminate in the sale and rental of their property, right? We see King is actually in LA more than 15 times before the Watts uprising. So one of the things that he will say about the Watts uprising is he will question this sort of shock, this surprise. He will say, in fact, if they had listened, if they had acted, this never would have happened, right? He will tell, actually, Mayor Daley, if Mayor Yorty, who was the mayor in LA, had listened, this wouldn't have happened. So in many ways, part of what King's shock about Watts is the level of willful blindness, if you will, right? The level of Californians being like, what is this? Why are Black people so angry? This is a state without discrimination. And Dr. King is like, no. He is very clear that people have been organizing. He has joined with them, and over, public officials, California residents, and the media have ignored, gaslit, or distorted those issues to make it seem like there's not a real problem when people were clear for years that there was.
I've always said that the problem in this country, whether we're talking about then or now, is that if it is not covert, then there's the belief that it's not overt. That if we don't see it, if it's not a cross burning, if it's not a church burning, if it's not a lynching, oh, no, things are good. As opposed to, no, what he laid out here and what you're laying out and what he was fighting, this is literally the epitome of systemic racism. And we're operating in a day where you have Republican Party and even some Democrats who do not believe in systemic racism, who want to make excuses for what is happening, and that's class and some other stuff, but they want to deny this reality.
Absolutely. And part of what Dr. King is saying, and again, from the 1950s onward, is he's calling out a Northern liberalism that he calls he's calling out both sidesism, and he says it's a kind of quasi-liberalism that is so committed to looking at all sides, right, that it's committed to none, right? That is a criticism that feels so relevant today. Second, he is talking about a whole range of systemic racism some of which is economic violence and some of which is physical violence. Because I think one of the other things when you start to look outside of the South is the ways that even physical violence by white people against Black people moving into neighborhoods, against Black people desegregating, is also treated differently, and particularly treated differently in this era by the media. So I would bet most people listening to this show have heard of Emmett Till, right? Emmett Till, the Chicago boy who goes to Mississippi to visit his uncle during the summer and is lynched for saying something to a white woman grocery store owner. How many of us have ever heard of Jerome Huey? Jerome Huey was a 17-year-old Chicago teenager who went for a job interview in the neighborhood of Cicero in Chicago in May of 1966. His family also owned a grocery store, but their grocery store was having trouble, so he goes to interview at a freight loading company. Now, Cicero, like many neighborhoods in Chicago, was a sundown neighborhood or a sundown town. And what that means is that Black people could work in those neighborhoods, but they were not welcome after dark. They were not welcome to live there. They were not welcome to be there. And so on that evening, in May of 1966, 11 years after the lynching of Emmett Till, he is waiting at a bus stop after his interview, and he is beaten to death, basically, by 4 young white men. And he will die in the hospital 2 days later. Why don't we know his name, right? This is a lynching that happens 11 years after Emmett Till in 1966, after the Civil Rights Act is passed, after the Voting Rights Act is passed, and a young man is killed because he is in the wrong neighborhood. But again, I bet very few of us know the name Jerome Huey because, again, even racial violence is treated differently in the North than it is in the South.
So speaking of that particular point, I think about there were 3 deaths that happened in the span of a couple of months. So we know with Ferguson, Michael Brown, how that thing just blew up. And it was really that reaction to it. But before that, Eric Garner took place in New York City. But also what was sandwiched in between those two was John Crawford III that took place in Ohio. And I think what happens is, and we see this all the time in media, what happens is which one gets the attention? A lot of people, we were at a rally, it was actually the 20th anniversary of the Million Man March. And they had a number of the families who were impacted, who lost children. And multiple times, John Crawford's father would come up to me and he would say, "Thank you for continuing to mention my son's name," because oftentimes it doesn't get mentioned. And I remember that there were a group of women who were on the front row, and they were upset because there were another group that spoke from the podium that day. And it was the prominent names that we know that became national stories. And these women were angry, upset, and they said, "Our sons died too. Our daughters died too. Why are we not up on that stage?" And unfortunately, how media operates, media picks and chooses which story gets elevated and becomes a national story.
This week on the other side of change.
Black Maternal Health Week.
The racial disparities are undeniable, making it clear that Black people experience racism from the womb. America and America's healthcare system has not taken the time to invest in what quality healthcare looks like for Black working people.
The state of Black maternal health in the United States is still dismal. It is environmental racism. It is systemic racism. It is the systems that we are born into.
Only on the other side of change on the Black Star Network.
Speak to your particular point of how, depending upon how media determines if it's big news, it then becomes elevated.
Well, and I think this media point is a crucial one, because I think one of the myths that we have about the civil rights movement stems from the media's role in parts of the Southern struggle. So what we see increasingly by the late 50s and early 60s is the national media taking Southern racism and the Southern movement seriously. They are doing rigorous reporting. They are not taking what Southern officials say at face value. They're questioning it. Reporters are going and spending significant time. And what you see is some significant coverage. And so if we're thinking about the Southern struggle, and we can think about Congressman John Lewis saying, we would have been a bird without a song without those reporters. Okay. At the very same time that this is happening, these same news outlets are covering the movement in New York, in Boston, in Chicago, in LA, very different. One of the things we know about this period, and we can extrapolate today, is that when you look at Southern media, like if you look at the Montgomery Advertiser around the Montgomery bus boycott, the Montgomery Advertiser hates the Montgomery bus boycott, thinks it's un-American, thinks it's disruptive, thinks it's horrible. But these are the very same kinds of frames that we will see newspapers like the New York Times use around the New York City school boycott in February of 1964, which is the largest civil rights protest of the era. It's almost twice as big as the March on Washington. But how the New York Times covers it is that it's violent, unreasonable, reckless, these kinds of frames. So I think one of the things that's really important, I think that you're getting us to in terms of the media, is the ways that partly we don't know the story outside the South because the media at the time was very invested in some ways exposing Southern horrors, questioning Southern officials, but taking Northern officials, if they say, oh, we're not discriminating, they say they're not discriminating. That's it. Why are Black people so angry? This is so unreasonable 10 years after Brown that New York Black people are saying that they're going to boycott schools because there's no even plan for desegregation, right? How that would have looked if that was in Birmingham to the New York Times looks very different than it does when it happens in New York. So I think the role that the media plays in giving us a narrative about sort of I think there's a set of myths that the media helps to kind of entrench that are with us today. One, that the media was largely in the South, not all across the country. Two, that Black Northerners did not organize nonviolent movements. In fact, some of the most, expansive mass movements are happening in cities like Chicago. Three, Northern Black people couldn't get down with nonviolence, couldn't get down with Dr. King. And this gets us to, I think, another point, Roland, that you're getting us to, which is the difference between the white mainstream media and how the Black press was covering it. Because if you turn to the Black press in this era, you get a very different perspective, both on the largeness, the robustness, all of the different issues that sort of movements all across the country are taking up. And then when we turn to the mainstream white press, we get a much different view.
Well, as you were talking, I could not help but remember that it was a race riot in Harlem that propelled Adam Clayton Powell from pastor of Abyssinian Baptist Church to the United States Congress. And when you open talking, and again, how media covered it. The media covered this as a race riot as opposed to police brutality. You open this talking about King in L.A., that story, police brutality. The reality is, if you look at virtually all of the race riots that started, nearly all of them started with the issue of police brutality. Now fast forward to the 1990s, 2000s, of course, George Floyd and Michael Brown and Eric Garner and John Crawford III, and I can just keep Kajima Powell, I can just keep naming names. Police brutality, police shootings, police actions. And I think what you lay out is that's because what you talk in terms of how media covers it is because what I always try to explain to people, and which is not an indictment of every white person, but the reality is the folks who control mainstream white media, they are largely white men. And these white men, and including white women, they bring their subjective biases to the table. So therefore, when they're making editorial decisions, when in television stations, radio stations, newspaper, and now digital, they are seeing America, seeing the 50 states, seeing the cities, seeing the neighborhoods through the prism of their whiteness. And so if they don't even know, I mean, listen, the Kerner Commission, they didn't agree on a lot. What they did agree on is that there were two Americas, one white, one black, and they said the media needed to diversify. The Kerner Commission was talking about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. And so the fundamental issue that King had to face is that he was battling a mainstream white media that had rose-colored views of their cities and said this stuff doesn't exist, where the black folks were like, I'm telling y'all this is real. And the white folks in the city and the state, regardless of whether we're talking Cicero, Chicago, Illinois, LA, California, New York City, New York State, whatever, they were just like, I don't know why what are you black folks talking about? Y'all got it good. What's wrong? We're not sicking dogs on you.
Right. And then, I mean, what King will say, right, in the 1960s is while the nation trembled with outrage about police brutality in the South, police brutality in the North was tolerated, ignored and justified.
But he also called out black people. Clarence Jones writes in his book that here he was, a lawyer in Los Angeles, doing very well economically, met with King, and he was like, man, I ain't got time to be involved in this sort of stuff. I'm getting paid. And he said King gives a speech, and he said it was as if King was boring into my soul, like he was talking directly to me. And it was after that speech when Clarence Jones committed himself to the movement. So King was even talking to black folks who believed that their lives were so much better than those Southern Negroes.
Right. And he's also, I think, there are sort of people like Clarence Jones, right, who King is kind of challenging to also step up. And because one of the things King is noticing, and he will be talking about northern cities by the mid-60s through a frame of domestic colonialism. And part of what he is critiquing through that metaphor, he's critiquing the police, the role of the police and courts as enforcers. That's his word, not mine. He's critiquing the ways that people are profiting from Black immiseration. And he is also critiquing the way that elevating certain Black people to high places, right, is used as a buffer to keep the majority of Black people segregated and impoverished. And in Chicago, he'll call it plantation politics. So I think one of the things that King is challenging is kind of both the systemicness of it, but also the different tactics that are used, particularly in sort of big cities like you're saying, LA, New York, Chicago, Boston, right? So there are there are these little, what we might call crevices. There are Black congressmen like Adam Clayton Powell. There are Black aldermen, like a number of aldermen that will support Richard Daley throughout that whole Chicago struggle and be really a buffer against and a barrier to any change in Chicago. So part of what King is also kind of pushing within kind of the Black community is to kind of see and start to sort of see the ways that this kind of systemic racism, like you're saying, is being perpetuated in somewhat different ways, right? So the blackface is in high places. There's all this obsession with the problem of Black crime or the problem of Black people, right? Black people just need to clean up their neighborhoods. And King is very adamant, right? That no, the problem is there's differential sanitation services between the West Side ghetto of Chicago and the northern suburbs. The problem is that people, right?
Yep.
And so he's telling a very different history, not just of the South, but about the United States in the 20th century, right? He's talking about FHA and, loans that enable, right, these white neighborhoods and white suburbs and are often denied, right, in Black neighborhoods and to Black people. He's telling a different narrative about, right, accessing even things like the GI Bill. He's telling a different narrative about the differentials in city services, in access to higher education. So he is very clear, right, that there's all this obsession with, merit and bootstraps and Black crime. And he's saying, actually, the problem is white crime, is white illegality in the ghettos. And he's also saying we need to tell a different history of the United States.
As you were talking on that particular front, when we talk about delivery of services, we talk about resources. It's also the illusion, the illusion that things are better, the illusion that things were so much grander. You had Blacks who fled the South, who were being threatened with death, who literally left land that they owned, that their families owned, because they were being threatened with death by the KKK and racist whites. Absolutely. who then travel up north, and now you're living in packed neighborhoods where you can't buy homes, where you can't even, in some cases, you couldn't even resell. You had Black folks who owned homes, and then if you wanted to sell the home, you had to get the permission of the person who you bought it from, which is just still crazy. And so then depressed values, therefore you can't build Black wealth. But the illusion was that, hey, but things are better. And so there's this conflict that is constantly going on. A few years ago, I was invited to give a speech at a church. It was an Episcopalian or maybe an Presbyterian church. I can't remember. It was a 50th anniversary of Dr. King giving a speech calling for, in essence, health care for all. That speech was in Chicago. It wasn't.
I know. Health care for all.
Right.
I mean, he's taking on, one of the things that he's also zeroing in on, right, is that these conditions, these overcrowded conditions that you're saying, are not just happening by accident. They are happening by policy. They are happening by municipal decision, and they could happen differently. So one of the things they're doing in the Chicago campaign, they're organizing rent strikes, they're organizing tenant organizations. They are basically calling out the fact that Chicago at this point has incredibly kind of some of the most developed kind of building codes in the country, and yet they're not enforced, and they're particularly not enforced in the two Black ghettos, right, which are the Chicago's South Side and then Chicago's West Side. And so King is saying there is profit being made from this, again, segregation and ghettoization. He's also saying these services are distinctly different. They are choosing to make these services different, right? Schools in Black neighborhoods, for instance, are so overcrowded that in many cities, you see school officials, because they don't want to rezone Black students into white schools, moving Black schools to double session days.
What's up, y'all? Look, Fanbase is more than a platform. It's a movement to empower creators, offering a unique opportunity for everyday people to invest in Black-owned tech, infrastructure, and help shape the future of social media. Investing in technology is essential for creating long-term wealth and influence in the digital age. The Black community must not only consume tech, we must own it.
Discover how equity crowdfunding can serve as a powerful tool for funding Black businesses, allowing entrepreneurs to raise capital directly through their community through the Jobs Act.
The reason I keep going back to the media piece is because it goes back to the story you saw, the young man who was killed. Mass media controls the narrative. Mass media frames the story. So as long as this race thing is a regional thing, then we don't have to really focus on that. And so what then happens is, as you were talking, it kept coming back to not my backyard. Oh, no, Dr. King, that's them down there. Now, don't bring that stuff up here. So they love him. Oh, it's great. Oh, we appreciate what you're doing. What he was essentially doing to white liberals, to so-called white allies, was holding up a mirror and said, this is actually happening here. And they essentially said, get the hell out of my face with that crap.
Absolutely.
That's what he was being confronted with.
Over and over and over, right? With Mayor Wagner in New York, with Mayor Yorty in LA, with Mayor Daley in Chicago, right? All of these people, as long as I was safe in the South, that's King's phrase, right? They might want to take pictures with him. They would say nice things with him. And then the very first moment he would say something like, in 1963, he calls Chicago as segregated as Birmingham. And guess what? Daley calls him an outside agitator. The Chicago Tribune calls him an outside agitator, right? This sense of you don't have any business talking about my city. Similarly with LA, similarly with New York. The other thing about that media, right, is that when we get to then the uprisings, then there is this convenient amnesia, like you're saying, because if you're not covering all of these movements that have been saying for years, hey, there's a real problem with police brutality. Hey, there's a real problem with job discrimination. Hey, there's a real problem with the lack of code enforcement. Then part of what you see in that national media is this shock and surprise. Why are people so angry? Why is this happening? As opposed to having to reckon with the fact that for years, people had protested and picketed and gone to meetings and organized petitions and gotten arrested to say, hey, there's these problems, and you ignored it, right? Because we could imagine how the media could have, for instance, treated the Watts uprising very differently, which is then to have gone back to, Governor Brown, to Mayor Yorty, to, various public officials in LA and said, why didn't you do anything when people raised that issue in 1962, raised that issue in 1963? How did you let it get to this? But no, that's not what the media did. The media was sort of obsessed with this kind of shock. They were obsessed with kind of protecting the police. The police are doing a good job, the LA Times will say. These complaints of police brutality, are largely not, they question them. And so that media frame both then has had, I think, very devastating consequences for how we understand that history, because in erasing those movements, most of us didn't learn those movements in school. Most books, right? Most books on the civil rights movement, our public celebration of King Day, right? It tends to be Southern. And so the notion that there were these huge movements all across the country, and that the United States, because I want to say one more thing, right? Because there is a kind of convenience to the Southern narrative, which is that it is regional, like we're talking about, but it also is a story that is told as a story of struggle and triumph, right? That we recognized an injustice and we fixed it. If we look outside the South, that story gets a lot more complicated and a lot less happy, right? And to grapple with the fact that in this country, right, oftentimes, even when you shine a light on injustice, injustice is not fixed. And I think that is something that people in the United States really don't want to face all that often.
I have to stay on media because it was media that opened your eyes to this Black-owned media. And why do I say that? I have said for last 20 years that my greatest fear is that the death of Black-owned media is going to be the death of Black people. And what I mean by that, and I'm being very specific when I say Black-owned media, not Black-targeted media. Black-targeted media means Black people don't own those properties, that we are being targeted for financial gain. So radio networks, digital websites, other products, television networks. The reality is that you take a BET, they're no longer Black-owned. You got a news show that airs one day a month. That's it, 1 hour, nothing virtually on digital. And so what are you being fed? You're being fed reality shows, you're being fed comedies, dramas, sitcoms, award shows, and that's what you're constantly being fed. The reality is it was Black-owned newspapers that was covering Dr. King in all of these cities.
Yep,
and
absolutely.
So the issue, I never forget watching, it was Meet the Press, and Doris Kearns Goodwin was on, and they begin to talk about Emmett Till, and she references the New York Times putting the image of Emmett Till on the cover. And I was watching it, and I immediately went to Twitter. I said, oh, hell no, you are not going to do this. How dare you call yourself a historian, Doris Kearns Goodwin, and not mention that it was Jet Magazine. It was the Chicago Defender that put that image on, that captured the attention of Black America, which then caused white media to then begin to focus on it. And so the story you're talking about, the reason I dare say a lot of folk don't know about this is because they were not paying attention to the Chicago Defender, the Amsterdam News, the Black newspapers on the West Coast, and the Banner in Boston. They weren't paying attention, and that was it. And so Black-owned media was there, were highlighting these stories over and over and over again, and it was white media not paying attention.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And in fact, I think part of this myopia because we have a pile of books on Dr. King. And one of the things that I really grappled with was how is it that this kind of Southernization of King has been maintained? And for me, part of telling this story is absolutely that it was about studying the movement in LA and studying the Black media for not a project around Dr. King initially, right? But just looking at the Black freedom struggle in LA before Watts, looking at the LA Sentinel and the California Eagle, which were the two big Black newspapers at the time. And I kept finding Dr. King. And that's not the story we get. The story we get is that King kind of, is in the South, and then there's struggle, and there's hardship, and then we get the Civil Rights Act, and then we get the Voting Rights Act, and then the next week Watts erupts, and King is surprised and shocked by Northern racism, and then he decides, he goes to Watts, and then he decides to go to Chicago. That's basically the story that is, replicated in so many books, so many documentaries.
Yeah, I think
like you're saying, Roland, if you look at the Black press, that story does not hold.
Yeah, I think when you look at, I think it's, first I have the book and I interviewed him. I think it's Nicholas, I'm looking it up right now. Nicholas Kotz, his book on what you just described, and I have the book, and it's called Judgment Days, Lyndon Baines Johnson, Martin Luther King, and the Laws That Changed America. Fascinating book, but what you just described is really exactly what he writes. He writes that when the riots in Watts breaks out, King travels to Watts, sees this, hears about the housing and the racism, and he writes that MLK falls into a state of depression. And he writes that LBJ, this is days after signing the Civil Rights Bill, Voting Rights Act, falls into a state of depression, that these two individuals are so, LBJ is shocked, mad, and pissed off that Black folks were not just, celebrating the signing of this law. And then MLK is depressed by what he sees. That literally is what Kotz, nice man, and I really enjoyed the book, writes in his book.
And it's just, I want to tell you a couple things. Number one, yes, is Dr. King depressed? Yes. But do you know what that depression is about? I think just like you're saying, if you think about people who were involved in the movement for Black lives, right? In Ferguson, in many years, then we get George Floyd, right? That sense of trying and lifting up these issues and lifting up these issues, and here it has happened again, right? So I think part of, if you don't start in the Black press, if you don't start talking and listening to people, who are being, interviewed in the Black press, who are movement activists, for instance, in LA, right? Seeing King in those spaces, and then seeing the ways, the willful kind of rejection of King will call Prop 14, for instance, a vote for ghettos. He will call it one of the most shameful tragedies of the 20th century. He will say its passage is part of what lays the groundwork for the Watts uprising 9 months later. But, right, that all gets erased in that Dr. King is depressed and Johnson is so surprised. The second thing that gets erased is what is actually what Dr. King calls on Johnson to do, right? They have a call after Watts, and Johnson's wanting all this credit for like the war on poverty. He thinks the war on poverty programs are going to solve everything. And Dr. King cuts in and says, no, we have to deal with this, the kind of racial policies of people like Yorty and Parker. That's the police chief, right? So police brutality, school segregation, housing segregation. The war on poverty is not enough if you don't deal with the kind of racial inequality in the city. And Johnson doesn't want to hear that.
We begin tonight with the people who are really running the country right now. Now, Trump is often wrong and misleading about a lot of things, but especially about history. Donald Trump falling in line with President Elon Musk.
In the wake of the unsettling news that MSNBC has canceled Joy Ann Reid's primetime show, The Readout, Roland Martin and the Black Star Network would like to extend an invitation to to all of the fans of Joanne Reed's MSNBC show to join us every night to watch Roland Martin Unfiltered, streaming on the Black Star Network for news, discussion of the issues that matter to you, and the latest updates on the twice-impeached, criminally convicted felon-in-chief Donald Trump and his unprecedented assault on democracy, as well as co-president Elon Musk's takeover of the federal government. The Black Star Network stands with Joanne Reed and all folks who understand the power of black voices in media. We must come together and never forget that information is power. Be sure to watch Roland Martin Unfiltered weeknights, 6 p.m. Eastern at youtube.com/Roland S. Martin or download the Black Star Network app.
What's interesting is, as you were describing, King talking about these issues, I reflect back on reading and listening to speeches from Malcolm X. Mm-hmm. And so there are different stages of Malcolm X. Malcolm X was an individual who was constantly evolving. And the reality is when he's assassinated in 1965, is that was a Malcolm X who was moving to another evolution of who he was. And in the Organization for African American Unity actually wrote, and he was meeting with, that he was going to join forces with pastors and civil rights leaders to fight Black.
Absolutely. And in fact, as you know, he'd been down in Selma a few weeks before he was assassinated and meets with Coretta. And they have this really lovely meeting, and she talks about the much wanted coming together of Malcolm and Martin, right? And she's devastated. Both kings are devastated when Malcolm is assassinated. I also think we have drawn even a kind of too sharp of a difference between them when you start to look at what Dr. King is supporting in the, in places like LA, right? Goes to LA and talking about the police murder of Ron Stokes in 1962, right? That's what Malcolm is doing there. Goes to New York, talking about and joining with, around the New York City school boycott, as is Malcolm, around the protests against kind of racist construction unions. Dr. King will call his favorite union New York's 1199. That's the only union that Malcolm X speaks in front of. So I also think sometimes we miss in many ways the overlaps of the kinds of movements that both of them are supporting, particularly as we get into the 62, 63, 64, and then the cutting short of Malcolm's life.
So the reason what I found to be very interesting is that when Malcolm X was going after, highly criticizing these Black preachers, and he was attacking them in speeches and on television, he was literally talking about slumlords in Harlem.
Absolutely.
He was literally talking about racism in the North.
Absolutely.
Now, here's what a lot of people want to also ignore. One of the major reasons a lot of people try to focus on infidelity of Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X's criticism of that.
No.
But a huge part of Malcolm X's disillusionment with the Nation of Islam was that when Nation of Islam had members who were beaten and killed by cops, they were always told to stand down by Elijah Muhammad. So Malcolm X is frustrated that we're saying one thing, we're not going to tell the chief, we're going to respond, and he's like, we never respond. So these two forces, to your point, were literally talking about the exact same thing. The difference was Malcolm X did not like that approach of King and others that he felt was assimilation, being cowards, just trying to acquiesce and appease the white man. But again, after Malcolm X goes to Mecca, he literally comes back and realizes that one, white folks, y'all let Black folks let us do what we do, but I'm actually in the same boat with them because we're trying to fight the exact same thing. He was dealing with racism, systemic racism in the North, while he was sitting here ripping King in the South, it was kind of like, we're in the same boat.
Oh, absolutely. And I think Malcolm is more complicated than we often see him, right? We can think about Message to the Grassroots, his critique of the March on Washington, but where is Malcolm during the March on Washington? He's in Washington, D.C., and he's made it known if people need him, he is there.
Yeah,
right?
privately met with Ruby Dee and Ossie Davis.
Absolutely, right? He is, I mean, like if we think about what are King and Malcolm doing in L.A., right? They're both like you're saying, I totally agree, right? I think there's been all this attention to, Malcolm growing, disillusionment with Elijah Muhammad around the infidelity. But I think this split really sort of begins much more, or not begins, but gets much more like palpable in 1962 when he's gone to LA because Ron Stokes has been killed. A number of other unarmed members of the nation have been injured, and people are building a movement, and Malcolm is kind of coming together with that movement, and then Elijah Muhammad makes him leave. And that happened, and he keeps, this kind of wanting to walk the walk and not just talk about it, but like you're saying, be able to be organizing, be doing kind of pushing for the kinds of change and being held back. So I think there's no way to understand the split as a kind of Malcolm's growing disillusionment with not being able to make that political rhetoric into actual movement on the ground.
One of the things that I found to be interesting as you lay out, you talk about King's travel to the point he wasn't traveling just to the South. Tempe, Arizona. Where were, in your research, we think about large cities. We think about Chicago, Los Angeles, New York City, Boston. But where were some of the outer way places he was also calling out Northern racism?
I mean, and I think before we know that Dr. King traveled a lot, but I think we've really reduced that to, it's about fundraising.
Right, or getting an award, or he was
getting
just
awards,
talking.
Right?
He was just talking.
Right, he's just talking, right? And I think one of the things that and again, really seeing this through the eyes of the Black press, that he is showing up for so many people's struggles, right? So people are saying, we're organizing. So how does he get involved with 1199 in New York? They're going to strike.
First of all, what's 1199?
Thank you. 1199 is the Hospital and Healthcare Workers Union in New York. And in 1959, they are trying to organize the lowest paid hospital workers, which are Black and Puerto Rican women working kind of a split shift. They're kind of like orderlies. They come in the morning and then they come in. They have to come in again at night. They're working their wages are so low, Dr. King says, that you can't even call them wages. And so they're organizing a strike. And they meet with Dr. King, and Dr. King says, count me in, call on me. And this is one of the things that I think we also have not understood about his leadership, which is that part of what is in this travel is Dr. King showing up and being, as we talk about today, showing up for sort of people's work, showing up for people's struggles, right? That's a key facet of his leadership as he sees it. And so he just travels, the amount of travel, the amount of exhaustion, right? To be able to do that and to really prioritize that. I think we've really missed that. I think the other thing we miss is how often, again, like you're saying, we assume he's getting awards. And then when you actually listen to what he's saying, he's constantly, right, reminding his audience that there is a problem here too, right? You've invited me, even in some of these where he's been invited just to talk about the movement in Birmingham or the movement in Selma, or, he's not stopping there, right? He's also talking about what's happening right there, wherever he is, whether it's Tempe, whether it's in Iowa, whether it's in Cincinnati, whether it's in, Washington, D.C., right? He's out for Washington, D.C. statehood. There are so many issues that he is joining and helping to kind of support local struggles. And I think we've missed this aspect of his leadership. I think we're so used to seeing sort of him, kind of at a distance, right? That this way that he shows up and that he also is learning and then constantly kind of expanding sort of how he sees the kind of segregation and white supremacy. We want to remember that most of this travel, again, before 1964, we're talking about the Jim Crow North. So most hotels in the North don't serve Black people, many restaurants, right? So part of this is also Dr. King staying with lots of people. And so therefore also being educated about all of these different issues across the country, right? So he goes to Detroit in 58 and they're taking him around and showing him the kind of early ravages of urban renewal, right? So all of these issues in part come out and become part of the ways that he's seeing kind of what has to change in the United States.
Couple of things really jump out at me. And that is, as I'm sitting here, as I looked at it, and so I interviewed Lori Stokes. And of course, her father was Louis Stokes, and, longtime member of Congress. And we talked about when her uncle Carl Stokes was elected mayor of Cleveland. She told me the story of Dr. King happened to be in the hotel room when the news came in that he won. And he wanted Dr. King to come downstairs with him.
That's not what happened.
No. But Dr. King said, no. It's like, no, go on down. But before that night, Stokes didn't want MLK even in the city to organize and mobilize Black people. That is a fascinating story because it shows you the fear of a Black politician of upsetting white people.
Absolutely. And the story that I think is often told about how Carl Stokes wins is that in the story I initially learned was that he gets the white vote. But when you actually look at what happens and what brings Carl Stokes to victory, particularly in that primary, is the fact that there's this massive Black turnout, right? That many Black organizations in the city, and including SCLC, and King spends a lot of time in Cleveland doing that kind of voter turnout, doing that kind of voter registration, and that it is Black turnout that changes the game for Carl Stokes in that primary. 2 years before he'd lost to, who becomes Mayor Locher, and then he wins that primary, and it is Black turnout that changes the game.
Again, let's peel back. Stokes doesn't want King coming.
Doesn't want King.
Doesn't want him doing anything.
Nope.
And he narrowly loses. He narrowly loses. King rebuffs him, says, I'm still coming. But, and this is which is why it's so important today, Black people in Cleveland said he can't win, so therefore I'm not going to vote. I talk about the New York Times did a story. A group of they talked to a group of Black voters after Trump was inaugurated. And there was a woman, a 39-year-old Black woman in Milwaukee, who said, a teacher's aide, who said she did not vote because she thought Trump was going to win. Well, you not voting guaranteed he was going to win. So if 100 or 200,000 others thought like you, that's how Trump won. Well, that was the case. Stokes doesn't win because Black people said, hey, he ain't got a shot. But MLK understands Black power and is spending lots of time talking to people, walking the streets, mobilizing, organizing. That's how Stokes wins. So here you have, Carl Stokes, you were scared to have King stand with you and you lose. And then when King stands with you and puts in the work, he wins.
Right. And that idea of Black power, that organized Black political power, we see it in Cleveland, but yeah, Carl Stokes being afraid. And the story I heard is that Stokes does not want him, even that victory night, anywhere near him. That what King and Abernathy say is that Stokes said he was going to call and he does not call. But that Black turnout, that Black organization by sort of Black organizations in Cleveland and SCLC changes the game.
But here's what you mentioned Black power, because that's also part of the deal there. King would not publicly rip Stokely Carmichael.
Nope.
But even in his book, Where Do We Go From Here in Chaos or Community, King said Black power is nothing but a slogan. There was no agenda behind it. And so in this case, he viewed Black power differently. And so where they differed, he simply felt that Stokely just saying Black power didn't achieve anything that needed to be agenda behind it. So him understanding that if we mobilize, organize to get a Carl Stokes elected, that is actual Black power.
Absolutely. And he meets with one of the interesting things 3 weeks before he's assassinated. He goes by Amiri and Amina Baraka's apartment and visits Baraka, and sort of some of the initial kind of organizing an idea with what will become, right, the convention movement that Baraka will work on, and then ultimately the National Black Political Convention in Gary begins in those conversations that day, right, about what does it mean to coalesce national Black political power, right? And King will joke with Stokely, right, let's get the power. We don't like not the slogan. And then King is like, but we got the slogan and not the power. So this idea that also, again, if we see part of what Dr. King is doing is constantly kind of doubling down and kind of going deeper. And part of that is about seeing that it's not just about an individual vote, right? It's about what collectively that vote can do. Because again, in many places in the North, Black people could vote, but that did not mean they could protect their interests, right? And that therefore what sort of real voting rights, what real voting power looked like was building kind of organized Black political power, and then, also around economic power, but that's, we could talk about that too.
Hatred on the streets, a horrific scene, a white nationalist rally that descended into deadly violence.
White people are losing their damn minds.
As an angry pro-Trump mob storms the U.S. Capitol,
we're about to see the rise of what I call white minority resistance. We have seen white folks in this country who simply cannot tolerate Black folks voting.
I think what we're seeing is the inevitable result of violent denial.
This is part of American history. Every time that people of color have made progress, whether real or symbolic, there has been what Carol Anderson at Emory University calls white rage as a backlash.
This is the rise of the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys. America, there's going to be more of this.
Here's all the Proud Boys, guys.
This country is getting increasingly racist in its behaviors and its attitudes because of the fear of white people.
The fear that they're taking our jobs, they're taking our resources, they're taking our women. This is white fear. When my book White Fear came out, White Fear, How the Browning of America is Making White Folks Lose Their Minds came out, I sent this book to a number of Black journalists across the country who are on network television, network and cable television, to send to some white journalists as well. And a Black journalist, I'm not going to say who, hits me up and says that that when the book was taken to this host producers, the white producers did not like the title of my book. The title is White Fear, How the Browning of America is Making White Folks Lose Their Minds. So then the black host says, and I'm saying, well, you know that the thesis of my book is literally what has been written in the New York Times, in Time and Newsweek, NPR, Axios, and I literally sent the articles. The black host says to me, well, you know, you're preaching to the choir. I said, no, I need you to be the pastor. I said, are you aware that I literally write about those same white journalists in the book? And the reason we don't have these conversations is because they won't have them on the air. And so when I was reading this, man, I said, wow. And I was shocked with the person who did this. You write 1967, journalist David Halberstam spent 10 days with King for a lengthy 1967 Harper's feature traveling with King to Cleveland. And you go on and write these. You talk about Halberstam wrote books and John Lewis described him as, quote, the only one covering us. You say, but here Halberstam's framing was different. With no mention of long-standing movements in these northern cities, Halberstam called King, quote, arrogant and in danger of losing his way. Halberstam longed for the, quote, heady days, unquote, when King was, quote, was our beloved, unquote. In northern ghettos, Halberstam claimed the schools are terrible, but there's no one man making them bad by his own ill will. The jobs are bad, but the reasons Negroes aren't ready for decent jobs are complicated, unquote. Then you say this here, which really jumps out at me. You said, for Halberstam, northern injustice might be bad, but its causes were amorphous, and northern blacks weren't necessarily, quote, ready, unquote, for decent jobs anyway. Now, this is somebody, and I have a number of his books, who has been hailed as this paragon of virtue, this amazing journalist, this unbelievable empathetic writer who frankly made his bones. He made his
career
legacy
covering Nashville.
It was built on covering the Black freedom movement, some call the civil rights movement.
Yep.
And so here's a white journalist, a white male journalist who they believe really understood us. And when I see this, that northern blacks weren't necessarily ready for decent jobs anyway, I thought about John Wayne, who was a white supremacist, who literally said that blacks weren't even ready for integration. When I see that, so this is a fundamental problem here, where this is a white male journalist who is beloved, who frames King in a way, and he is shaping the national narrative. So when you read his article, well, if Halberstam says that, well, it must be true.
And over, we see that word arrogant being used against Dr. King a lot in these years, and particularly when he starts, again, to turn his, like, when he's talking about, right, a Cleveland or a New York or an LA, right, now he's arrogant, right? He's out of his place. And then that second point, right, which is that, again, one of the other ways that Northerners tended to excuse the inequalities in their cities was this idea that there was, culture, and that people weren't ready, or that people didn't have the right work ethic, or people didn't have the right educational values. And over that would become part of the ways then they would cover sort of Black life in their cities as a dysfunctional, as a problem, as to sort of maintain that idea, right? That it wasn't that it was the schools were segregated, it was that Black people didn't value education, or there was this dysfunctional culture. It wasn't that we had differential segregation in parts of the city. It was that Black people didn't clean up their neighborhoods, right? And so here we see somebody like David Halberstam, like you're saying, who makes his career, right, covering Nashville, covering the civil rights movement. But when we get closer to home, that coverage is very different. And like you're saying, it then shapes how we understand the North, how we understand King's work in the North, and how we understand like Black life in cities like Cleveland or New York.
Hello, I'm Isaac Hayes III, founder and CEO of Fanbase. Listen to what I'm about to tell you. The window to invest in Fanbase is closing. We've raised over $10.6 million of our $17 million goal. That means there's room for less than 6,370 people to invest in Fanbase for the average amount. The minimum to invest in Fanbase right now is $399. That makes you an owner in Fanbase today. Go to startengine.com/fanbase to invest. Why? Because current social apps have taken advantage of users for far too long, with content suppression, shadow banning, harmful racist content, and no real tools for monetization and equity. Fanbase has over 1.4 million users and counting, allowing anyone to reach all their following and monetize their content from day one. Social media is the new TV, and whoever owns the apps that distribute that content have the opportunity to own potential billion-dollar companies. While big platforms with uncertain futures are failing to serve their users, Fanbase is stepping up to fill the gap. Don't wait until it's too late. Invest now, invest for yourself and your future. Go to startengine.com/fanbase and own the next generation of social media.
Two more questions. The first question I'll ask is, and I ask every author this here, in your writing, in your research, in your interviews, what was the wow moment for you? What was the moment that caused you to go, oh my God, this is crazy. I can't believe this, or I never even knew this?
I mean, I think the wild moment is like sort of starting in that research in LA and being like, wait a sec. All these books make it seem like King's just discovers the problem of Black people in LA. After
this was not the book this was not what you were researching.
No.
Go ahead.
So that, and then once you ask the question, it's sort of like, those, kaleidoscopes we had as kids, right? Where you turn and then all of a sudden the whole picture changes. And so in some ways, when I started asking that question, when I started saying, okay, maybe this story we've been told about King discovering the North post-1965, about Northern Black people not having an interest in King, maybe that story is not what we have been told. And then just finding it everywhere. So both he is everywhere, joining with movements all around this country, not discovering Northern racism, because in fact, he had gone to school in the North. And so King at age 20, right, has experienced housing discrimination and housing segregation because he's lived it. King has experienced the limits of Northern liberalism because he's lived it. So again, the whole kind of way that the story that still persists had so many holes in it. I think that was the most surprising thing. It wasn't one revelation. It was just how much there was to find and how much things that we thought we knew, right? I knew he'd gone to BU. I knew he'd gone to Crozier. But the way we tend to talk about that is who's he studying with? What's he studying? Not where is he and how is that experience going to affect how he thinks about this country and the world?
Second to last question. I thought I had two, but one just jumped up. I think it's really important because oftentimes it is grossly overlooked. How critical was his wife, Coretta Scott King, to this as well? We only view him as one-dimensional. She is portrayed as the woman who went on the road. She sang, she raised money, and then she went back home to take care of the kids and to tend to the house. That's not the fact. The reality is a lot of his thinking derived from her arriving at that place before he did.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we need to understand sort of how fierce and how, I mean, in many ways, when they meet, she's more of a political activist than he is. Coretta Scott goes to Antioch College in Ohio. It is both an expanding experience, but she also, like King, encounters kind of Northern racism, the limits of Northern liberalism. At Antioch, she's introduced to the Progressive Party. They're running a third-party challenge in 1948, right, against Truman and the Democrats on issues domestically of segregation, on issues in terms of foreign policy, a kind of anti-Cold War militarism. So in some ways, many of us associate kind of the triple evils, right, of racism, poverty, and militarism, right, with those last years of his life. Those ideas, and I'm not saying they don't deepen and ripen, but those ideas are already there when he meets her in 1952. Coretta Scott has met Paul Robeson, has met Bayard Rustin before she meets Martin Luther King, right? She meets both of those men through her work as a student delegate and work with the Progressive Party. So who she is when they meet. When they get married, just to tell you a story, when they get married in 1953, she insists she won't wear white. She doesn't wear a long dress. She wears a tea-length light blue dress. And she insists to her very imposing father-in-law to take Obey out of their vows because it makes her feel like an indentured servant. Okay, so this is who Coretta Scott is and who is Martin Luther King's beloved. And again, 1953, this is not 1968, right? 1953, no Obey. She keeps her name, right? Despite the fact that the press often just will refer to her as Mrs. Martin Luther King, if you hear her, she is always Coretta Scott King. That global perspective that we often associate, again, with the last years of his life, she has much earlier. For instance, 1962, she joins a Women's Strike for Peace delegation to Geneva around pressuring the United States and the Soviet Union to sign a nuclear test ban treaty. She's very sort of committed to kind of global peace, anti-nuclear. She leads a march in 1963 to the UN. She meets with the head of the UN. So these global issues. And then when he gets the Nobel Prize in 1964, she talks about it as both a joy, but she also sees it as a burden because she sees them having a much greater responsibility to the world, and in particular to coming out against US policy in Vietnam. And from 1965 on, she is out against the war in Vietnam. And this is tremendously controversial. It's tremendously brave, right? And she's really leading the country. She's leading him, but she's also leading the country around this issue. And again, I think we often see we miss, right, that like you're saying, many of Dr. King's sort of ideas are being shaped in conversation, in her politics as well.
Last question. What if we apply what King was trying to do outside of the South, then what lessons do we take from this today in terms of how we should be approaching what's happening in this country? What is happening in this country, I fundamentally believe, is not a South versus North, but as a city, urban problem, and everywhere else, it's nirvana, it's heaven.
So I think there's a number of lessons. The first is part of, again, looking at the King of the North is about also challenging the misuse of Dr. King against movements today. Right? My students talk about how King is often rolled out as the ultimate gaslight, right? Against Black Lives Matter, against the Palestine protests, right? You're not doing it right. Be more like Martin. He was respectable. He was passive. And in many ways, missing that the very same criticisms of young people today, young activists today, are being waged against Dr. King, right? So that's the first lesson, right? Is what does it mean to be more like King, right? To be more like King is, in fact, like many young activists today. The second is that King is a believer in nonviolence, but that nonviolence is about disrupting the status quo. It's disrupting the comfort of inequality. And so that nonviolence is bus boycotts, it's sit-ins, it's rent strikes, it's school boycotts, it's disrupting city life. One of my favorite quotes from Dr. King in 1964, Brooklyn Core they've been protesting housing and school segregation and job discrimination in the city and gotten very little change. And so they decide they're going to stall cars on the freeway out to the World's Fair. The World's Fair is opening in Queens in 1964 in New York City. And as you might imagine, Black moderates, white moderates, city leaders go crazy. This is horrible. How could they do that? And they try to get Dr. King to come out against this. And he refuses. And he says, we do not need allies more devoted to order than to justice, right? And then he says, I've heard a lot of talk about our direct action alienating our friends. If our direct action alienates our friends, they never were really our friends. Right? So I think that the necessity of disrupting the comfort of inequality, the comfort of injustice. And then I think the third lesson we get from sort of both Kings is the ability to double down, right? To go bigger, go wider, right? That I think sometimes we forget how hard it is and how scary it is and how scared they are, right? That part of what people like Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King bring is the ability to move within fear, not that they stop being scared, right? So I think we have to disabuse ourselves of this idea that you just move past fear. No. But also their ability to double down, that in the face of pressure, in the face of opposition, in the face of threats, to both stand fast and then also to go bigger and go harder.
Folks, the book is King of the North, Martin Luther King Jr.'s life of struggle outside the South. Jeanne Theoharis. Jeanne, it's great that you were researching something else and stumbled upon the amazing work that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was doing there in the North. I did not ask this question, but I'll make the statement, and I'm sure you agree because your reporting lays it out. The other thing is this here, King was criticized for people that say, oh, he's swooping in. But the reality is he was called by people to come in. King supported local efforts on the ground. It wasn't about him stealing attention. When he was called, he was elevating what the local folks were doing and giving them credit and backing up what the fights they were doing on the ground as well. And so that's too often, I think, a mistake that people make as well, thinking he was just swooping in for all the attention. No, he was helping local organizers amplify their work.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Fascinating book. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much.